Her friends called it a reset. I called it a warning. It started with a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. One of those late-night FaceTimes that women think are silent because they're whispered. I was in the hallway, halfway to the kitchen, when I caught my wife's voice. Claire was laughing softly, saying her coworkers told her to ghost me for a week. They said it would re-establish dominance, make me chase again. She said she wasn't sure, that I'd been quiet lately, distracted. Then one of them said, "Men always come running once they feel you pulling away." That was the part that made her laugh hardest. I stood there, barefoot on the hardwood, holding a glass of water I suddenly didn't want anymore. I didn't barge in. I didn't say a word. I just listened until the call ended, then set the glass down on the counter. The sound of it touching the granite was louder than it should have been. Something in me went still. The next morning, she kissed me on the cheek before work like nothing was different. She wore her favorite beige coat, AirPods in, and that faint trace of Chanel she saved for office days. She said she'd text me later. She didn't. The first day, I waited. The second, I understood. Her experiment began exactly as planned. No calls, no replies, no presence. She wanted me to miss her, but the silence she thought would bend me ended up sharpening me instead. By day 3, I stopped checking my phone. By day 4, I stopped leaving dinner for her in the fridge. By day 5, something inside me had gone quiet in a way that felt permanent. I started moving differently, staying late at work, hitting the gym again, cleaning out the garage. The more space she took, the more clarity I found. When I did check her socials, I noticed the patterns. The carefully posed pictures, the comments from coworkers hyping her up. Independent queen. Soft launch of your freedom. It didn't make me angry. It made me realize I'd spent too long loving someone who treated affection like currency. By day 7, I had moved half my clothes into the spare room. By day 8, I had moved half my life out entirely. She came home that evening, smiling, expecting me to be waiting. Instead, she found drawers empty, the closet half bare, and a single note on the counter beside her untouched glass of wine. It said, "You wanted distance." I just gave it definition. When she saw the bank accounts and the locked safe in the study, she understood. She hadn't just lost silence. She'd lost the one man who never raised his voice, because he didn't need to. When she opened the front door that night, I could hear her gasp from the driveway. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of scream you'd expect in a movie. It was quiet, broken. She stood there staring at the half-empty closet like it was a crime scene. I'd left everything too neat, shirts folded, drawers organized, shoes lined up in perfect rows. That order told her more than chaos ever could. She called my name twice. When there was no answer, she called again, louder this time. I was already gone. I'd checked into a small Marriott off the highway, the kind of place where no one asks questions if you pay in advance. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the last text she'd sent days earlier. They were simple, plans, reminders, emojis. Nothing that sounded like a marriage. I deleted the thread, turned the phone face down, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in years, I felt calm. Back at the house, I imagined her pacing from room to room, opening drawers, checking the bathroom counter, realizing how much of me had vanished. The man who never raised his voice had finally made silence loud enough to echo. She must have checked the joint bank account next. I'd left her enough to be comfortable, but not enough to pretend everything was fine. When she tried the safe, she would have found it locked and empty. I didn't do it to punish her. I did it to make her understand that trust, once broken, doesn't regenerate. It evaporates. Later that night, she texted. The first message came at 9:14 p.m. "We need to talk." The second, a few minutes later, "I don't know what you think this is, but I didn't mean I didn't open them." I just watched the blue dots appear, vanish, then reappear. Every word she typed was another confirmation that the experiment had failed. At the hotel, I turned on the small TV, some late-night news humming in the background. The anchor talked about markets, politics, and storms in states I'd never visit. It all sounded distant, irrelevant, peaceful. I opened my laptop, logged into a new account I'd set up weeks before, and started searching for apartments in another city. A place without shared memories. A place where silence meant freedom, not punishment. When I finally turned out the lights, my phone buzzed one last time. I didn't check. Some messages don't need to be read to know their meaning. She had wanted control, and for 8 days, she thought she had it. But real control belongs to the one who can disappear without slamming the door. The morning after I left, she called my office. I didn't answer. Then she called again. By noon, she'd left 3 voicemails, each one shorter and shakier than the last. The first was anger disguised as authority. The second, confusion wrapped in pride. The third was just silence, a faint breath at the end before the click. I didn't delete them. I just listened once and let the sound of her unraveling settle into the quiet of the room. I spent that day methodically closing doors. I met with the bank manager, moved the remaining funds, signed documents that turned hours into mine. The man behind the desk asked if I wanted to keep the joint account open. I said no. He didn't ask why. Some decisions explain themselves in the tone of your voice. At lunch, I sat in a small diner across from the Marriott. The waitress poured my coffee and asked if I was traveling for work. I told her I was between places. She smiled and said, "A fresh start then." I nodded, realizing how simple she made it sound. Maybe it was that simple. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop and saw an email from Claire. The subject line was just my name. No words in the body, only a photo, a picture of our bedroom. The one she used to complain felt too cold. My side of the bed was stripped bare, the pillow gone. Beneath it, she'd written in the corner of the photo, "Can we fix this?" I stared at the image until the screen dimmed. Then I closed the laptop. Fixing implies something's still alive. We weren't. That evening, she showed up at the Marriott. I saw her reflection in the lobby window before I saw her face. She looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. The kind of small that comes when certainty collapses. She stood at the desk, asking for my room number, her voice trembling as she spelled my last name. The clerk looked at me from behind the counter. I shook my head slightly. He hesitated, then told her there was no guest by that name. She walked out a minute later, her heels echoing against the tile. I watched from the window until her car disappeared into the dark. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt. Just distance, the kind that doesn't ache, the kind that feels earned. She had wanted to teach me a lesson in silence. What she learned instead was that silence only hurts the one who breaks it first. By the third day, the house wasn't just empty, it was hollow. I could feel it through the updates she didn't mean to send. Mutual friends started reaching out, subtle messages asking if we were okay. That was her doing. She wanted the story to reach me, to remind me that she still had a narrative to control. I didn't respond. Let her curate whatever version of me she needed to justify what she'd done. The real version was done explaining himself. That afternoon, she sent another message. No words this time, just a photo of a half-packed suitcase on the bed. I could tell she wanted me to believe she was leaving too, that she could match my disappearance with one of her own. But the thing about bluffing is that it always looks desperate when the other player has already folded. I didn't reply. The silence wasn't cruelty, it was closure. I spent that evening walking downtown, blending into crowds of people who didn't know my name. It felt strange how easy it was to disappear in plain sight. I stopped at a small bar near a neon-lit corner store, the kind that smells like old wood and whiskey. A game played quietly on the TV. I didn't watch it. I just listened to the sound of other people living lives that weren't falling apart. My phone buzzed twice on the counter. Her name again. I flipped it over, face down. Later, I drove past our neighborhood one last time. The porch light was still on, same warm yellow glow spilling over the driveway. Through the blinds, I could see movement, her shadow crossing the room, stopping every few steps like she was listening for something. Maybe for me, maybe for herself. For a moment, I almost parked. Habit is dangerous like that. But then I remembered how she had looked at her phone when her friends told her to vanish for a week, how easy it was for her to treat absence as a weapon. And I drove on. Back at the hotel, I opened a new bank account, finalized the transfer for the apartment I'd picked in another city, and emailed my resignation to HR. I reread the message twice. Simple, clean, unemotional. Then I hit send. Before bed, I checked her messages again. The last one she'd written said, "I don't even know who you are anymore." I smiled slightly. She was finally right about something. The man she'd known wouldn't have left. The one she created by neglecting him just had. 2 days passed before she tried something new. She stopped texting altogether. No calls, no messages, nothing. I recognized the pattern instantly. It was her returning to the same tactic that started all of this. She thought silence would make me chase her again. What she didn't understand was that she was replaying a move that no longer worked. You can't manipulate someone who's already detached. I spent the weekend finishing what I'd started. My resignation was accepted faster than I expected. The apartment manager in Denver confirmed my move-in date. Everything was aligning too smoothly to be coincidence. It felt like life was rewarding me for finally stepping away from noise. I went out that night to clear my head. The streets were alive with people chasing distractions, bars humming with laughter, music spilling into the cold air. I stopped at a Starbucks, the same one she and I used to visit on Sunday mornings. The barista still remembered my order. That small, human recognition hit harder than I expected. I realized how much of myself I'd lost in the quiet compliance of being her stability while she tested my limits. Back at the hotel, I found a note slid under the door. My name on the front, written in her handwriting. She'd been here again. Inside, only one sentence. If you wanted to hurt me, you've done it. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the trash. She still didn't get it. I wasn't hurting her. I was done saving someone who mistook patience for weakness. The next morning, I checked her social media. I shouldn't have, but curiosity won. She'd posted a photo with her coworkers, the same ones who told her to ghost me. She was smiling, but the caption gave her away. Some lessons come too late. The comments were full of hearts and sympathy emojis. She wanted the world to see her as the wounded one. That used to bother me. Now it didn't. People believe whatever version of the story is told first. I'd chosen to stop telling mine. That night, I packed the last of my things, zipped the suitcase, and looked around the small Marriott room one final time. It had been a strange kind of sanctuary, four walls that witnessed transformation. When I turned off the light, the quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. She had ghosted me to gain control. I had ghosted the entire marriage to find peace. By the time the moving truck arrived, she had stopped pretending to be strong. Her last message came early that morning, at 6:07 a.m. A single line that said, "Can we meet before you go?" I read it once, didn't reply, and watched the text fade into the blur of notifications. Some conversations end better in silence. I spent the morning loading the boxes into the truck, each one labeled neatly. Books, clothes, documents, memories. The sun was barely up, the sky that pale gray color that looks like hesitation. When I shut the final box, I realized how light everything felt. Not because I'd lost anything, but because I'd stopped carrying what wasn't mine anymore. Around noon, I stopped by the house one last time. The driveway looked the same, the porch light still flickering like a heartbeat that refused to die. Her car was parked crookedly, like she'd come home fast and slept badly. When I opened the door, the smell of her perfume hit me first, sweet, heavy, clinging to everything. She was sitting on the couch, knees pulled close, phone in hand. The moment she saw me, she froze. She said she didn't expect me to come back. I told her I only came for what was left of me. My tone was calm, steady, but her eyes filled anyway. She started explaining how it was never supposed to go this far, how the silence had been a game she didn't know how to stop playing. I listened, not out of interest, but out of respect for the ending. Her words spilled faster, her voice breaking on every other breath. Then she asked if I could stay one more night. I looked around the room, the framed photos, the dinner table we hadn't sat at in weeks. Everything looked staged now, like a museum of what used to be. I told her that staying would just make leaving harder. She nodded slowly, the way people do when they understand but wish they didn't. Before I left, she reached for my hand. For a moment, I let her touch it. Then I pulled away gently and said, "You taught me that distance fixes what words never could." She flinched, like the words themselves were sharp. I walked out without closing the door. As I got into the truck, I saw her step outside, barefoot, watching me go. I didn't look back again. There's a moment between departure and freedom where everything feels suspended, like grief and peace shaking hands. That's where I was. The highway out of town was nearly empty that morning, the kind of silence that feels earned. The world outside the windshield blurred into long stretches of asphalt and light. I kept the radio off. I didn't need music. The sound of tires against the road was enough, a rhythm that felt like release. Every mile was distance measured in forgiveness I no longer owed anyone. By the time I crossed state lines, her number had already tried me 5 times. I didn't block it. I wanted to see the effort. Each missed call was proof she'd finally realized that control and connection were never the same thing. Around noon, A text came through. Just 2 words, come back. I let it sit there, glowing on the dashboard screen for a moment before it faded. There's something final about watching someone's last request disappear without touching it. In Denver, the apartment was smaller than I expected, but it felt honest. White walls, an unfinished couch from IKEA, and sunlight spilling across the floor. I unpacked in silence, one box at a time, the same way I'd left her, methodically, without emotion. By the time the sun began to dip, the place looked lived in enough to feel like mine. I ordered dinner from Chipotle, ate it standing by the window, and realized how peaceful it was to not explain my quiet to anyone. Later that night, I scrolled through my phone, half expecting another message. None came. Maybe she'd finally stopped trying. Or maybe she'd just run out of ways to make the silence hurt me. Either way, it didn't matter. I had stopped waiting for closure the day I packed the first box. I went for a walk downtown. The air was colder here, sharper. A busker played an old blues song near the corner, his guitar case half open beside him. I dropped a few bills in and kept moving. Every sound around me, the hum of neon lights, laughter from nearby bars, felt like proof that life kept going, even when people didn't. When I returned, I opened the curtains wider and stood by the window for a long time. Somewhere hundreds of miles away, she was probably staring at the same kind of night, wondering when silence turned against her. For me, it wasn't a weapon anymore. It was home. As the city lights flickered below, I whispered to myself, not with anger but with calm certainty. I didn't leave to teach her a lesson. I left because I finally learned mine. Weeks passed quietly. I built new patterns, ones that didn't involve her name echoing through the day. Mornings started early, coffee from the Keurig, runs through the park, emails answered before most people were awake. It wasn't happiness yet, it was discipline. And sometimes, that's the same thing. The silence that once felt like punishment had become routine. I no longer checked my phone expecting her. I no longer wondered what she was doing when the sun went down. But endings have a way of testing themselves. One night, as I left the office late, a number I didn't recognize lit up my screen. I almost ignored it, but something about the area code made me pause. It was hers. A new number. I answered, not out of curiosity, but closure. Her voice came through, tired, uneven, smaller than I remembered. She said she just wanted to hear me. I stayed silent. She filled the quiet with apologies, each one softer than the last, each one landing a little too late. She said she finally understood what I'd been trying to show her. I told her understanding doesn't erase history. She asked if I hated her. I said no. Hate still requires energy. She went quiet then, the kind of silence that means someone's running out of words. I could almost hear her breathing, steady but fragile. Then she asked if I'd met someone else. I didn't answer. Some truths don't need to be spoken to be felt. She whispered that she hoped I was happy. I said I was learning. Then, before she could say anything more, I hung up. That was the last time we spoke. After that call, I stood in the kitchen staring at the faint reflection in the microwave door. I didn't look victorious. I just looked free. The kind of free that doesn't celebrate, it just exhales. I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and let the city move around me. Cars passed, laughter drifted up from the street, and for the first time, none of it felt distant. The next morning, I deleted her new number. No hesitation, no nostalgia, just a clean swipe and the quiet click of finality. Closure isn't about getting answers, it's about no longer needing them. By the time the weekend came, I realized something simple but irreversible. She had spent her silence trying to test love. I had spent mine rediscovering self-respect. And between those two versions of silence, only one of us found peace. The first snow of the season came early that year. I remember standing by the window, coffee in hand, watching flakes fall against the quiet streets below. The city looked different under white, cleaner, slower, softer. It was the kind of morning that used to make me think of her. But now, she wasn't part of those moments anymore. She was just an old photograph in a drawer I never opened. A few days later, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "For what it's worth." I hesitated, then opened it. It was from her. The message was long, but the first line stopped me cold. She wrote, "You were never supposed to leave. I was supposed to win you back." I kept reading. She talked about the nights she couldn't sleep, the silence that now haunted her, how she'd realized too late that control and love can't share the same room. She said she didn't want me back anymore. She just wanted to say sorry without expecting an answer. I believed her. For the first time, her words didn't sound like performance. They sounded like surrender. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because forgiveness doesn't always need witnesses. Sometimes, the act of moving on is the apology you give to yourself. I archived the email and went for a walk. The air was sharp, the streets glowing with the soft gold of winter lamps. I passed couples holding hands, laughing, the kind of simple intimacy we once treated like a given. But instead of bitterness, I felt something else, a quiet gratitude. She had taught me exactly what I needed to learn. That peace doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from no longer needing to be. That night, I cooked dinner for myself, poured a glass of wine, and ate in silence. The sound of the fork against the plate felt grounding. I looked around the apartment. The unpacked boxes now gone. The couch finally comfortable, the plants thriving by the window. The place looked lived in. So did I. Before bed, I opened my phone one last time, scrolling through old photos I hadn't deleted yet. One of them stopped me. It was from years ago, her laughing in the passenger seat of my car, sunlight on her face. I didn't feel pain looking at it anymore. Just distance. A clean kind of distance. I closed the phone, turned off the light, and let the quiet settle. The silence she once used to control me had become my sanctuary. It had been 6 months since I'd left when I saw her again. Not in person, just by accident. A video popped up on my feed. Someone had tagged her at a restaurant, laughing with friends, wine glasses clinking in the background. For a moment, I froze. The sight of her didn't hurt, not really. It was more like seeing a place you used to live, familiar, but no longer yours. She looked different, lighter somehow. Or maybe I was just seeing her without the weight of my expectations. I watched for a few seconds, then scrolled past. But something stayed with me. The realization that she wasn't the villain anymore. She was just someone who mistook power for love, the way I once mistook patience for loyalty. We both played roles we didn't understand. And somewhere along the way, the silence we built became the final word neither of us could take back. That evening, I went to a small cafe downtown. It was quiet, warm, filled with the low hum of conversations and the smell of roasted coffee beans. A woman sat a few tables away reading a book, sunlight spilling across her hands. She caught me looking once, smiled, then went back to her page. It wasn't a moment of revelation or destiny, just something simple, human, real. For the first time in a long time, I smiled back without hesitation. When I got home, I stood by the window watching the city lights blink against the dark. I thought about how much of life happens in the spaces between sound, the pauses, the restraint, the quiet exits that never make a scene. That's where I found myself again. Not in the noise of explanations, but in the calm of final decisions. I poured a drink, turned on a faint song playing from my phone, and let the sound fill the apartment. It was the same kind of music she used to play when things were good. Funny how something that once belonged to her now felt entirely mine. Before turning in, I looked at my reflection in the window. Same face, different man. The kind who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't explain. The kind who learns to leave softly, but completely. I whispered into the stillness. Not for her, not even for closure, but as a truth to keep me steady. I didn't disappear, I said quietly. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. And with that, I turned off the light. The silence didn't echo anymore. It exhaled,